We are about to be joined by Stuart Byrne. His album Maybe Not Today is live wherever you get your music, and here's a taster. This is Forgotten.
That they once had lay hidden in the pain, the forgotten fade away. Could we just try to reason with this life and resurrect dying?
That is The Forgotten. That is the voice of Stuart Byrne. His brand new album, Maybe Not Today, is out now. Stuart, you're very welcome to the show and congratulations.
Hey, Owen, yeah, thanks very much. I'll have to get used to that, listening to myself back, something that I'm not really too familiar with.
How does that feel, listening to yourself back, and is it something that you've got any bit comfortable with yet?
Yeah, ish, over the, you know, during the period of writing and going through the album, I've had to get used to it because it's something that I would have been would have had difficulty with before, and probably explains why I'm doing this later in life rather than when I was probably younger, like, you know. But it's definitely a huge part of the process that you have to kind of build a sort of inner confidence when you're within yourself without building this arrogance, I suppose. But it's only something that comes with time. I felt it's something that came with time, and definitely gone through the whole process of doing the album, I got a little bit more comfortable with it, you know.
Maybe Not Today has been a project that's been in the work for quite some time. How long are we talking here? 2-3 years? And like you mentioned, there's something about your early life. This is something you've wanted to do for quite some time, even before the creative process started.
It is, Owen. Yeah, it's something that's always been in me. I mean, I learned to play the guitar when I was 17, 18, and I started even writing back then. Even one of the songs that's on the album, the second track, I Could Never Be, I wrote when I was 19. So I always had this in my head, and that song is probably a song that's sort of it planted a seed in me that one day I would have to do this. And then just life just kind of gets in the way. Things happen, you know. I wasn't particularly confident when I was younger that I could do this kind of a thing. So it was always a kind of a difficulty for me. Like, I'm not that kind of person who can kind of go into a room and pick up a guitar and say, you know, hey, let's get a sing song going. I'd be kind of quite the opposite. I'd have to be sort of almost dragged to pick up a guitar and sing a song, like, you know. So I think the football career kind of was something that kind of took off and did well, but this was always at the back of my head. I always continued to write, even in the background. It's something I did even as a hobby. I would sit down privately and just kind of write and sort of sing to myself, really. I couldn't even sing in front of my wife at some stages. It's something that I had a lot of difficulty with because I just didn't think I had a good voice, didn't think I was any good at it, you know. And then I don't know, something triggered in me about 3 years ago. I think I went to see the Hot House Flowers on Vicar Street. That might have helped, and I'd be a big Hot House Flowers fan. And I was kind of looking at Liam Wainley, who was probably one of the best Irish musicians to ever come out of this country, like, you know. And his voice it was like he was 21 again. I couldn't believe it. Like, you know, here's this man. I don't know how old Liam is. Liam's probably in his mid 50s now. Like, he could even be older, could be younger. I'm not too sure. But I was just taken aback by it, and I took that as inspiration to pick it up again and say, I'm gonna complete what I always wanted to do. So I started writing I had a few songs from, I had probably 5 or 6 songs from a number of years ago, and just gradually through a process, just took a step forward, took a leap of faith, and started to put it together.
That's remarkable. Like, those moments of inspiration, a lot of people can have, but sometimes that inspiration can fade away after a couple of hours or after a couple of days or weeks. How did that manage to stay in you for so long, to the point where you managed to see this thing through to the end? And not only that, but to find that inner confidence to be able to tell people about it and to be able to perform in front of other people.
So I think that helped. So believe it or not, it's funny you should say that. You know, that I was finding that's what was happening. I was sort of dropping it after a day or two, or a week, or a couple of weeks, and I don't know, on something. The album is called Maybe Not Today, and the first song is called Maybe Not Today, because that was almost like my motto. Maybe not today, and I kept coming back to that. You know, I wasn't finishing things. I wasn't going through with it. Like you said, and I didn't have the confidence to kind of go through with it. I think people will just think this will, you know, we'll just kind of write it off. So those little seeds started to plant in my head, and I think the going to see the House Flowers, and it sort of just triggered something that was in me. There's also, like, I mean, personally, there's been a lot going on in our lives since I know we're going through a very, very difficult time now, but since the last downturn, which is 08, 09, a lot would have went on in our lives, kind of coincided with me returning from football, and we had to kind of move out of the house at the time. We'd been renting for 10 years, and it was a very, very difficult period, and I think I was primarily focused on trying to kind of correct that problem, and, you know, try and get a career back, get some sort of stability in our lives, with the family. And I think I was very much kind of focused on that at the time. And then in the last 2 or 3 years, I've been able to kind of switch back to myself, I suppose, and just kind of focus on this. And it's just accelerated in the last couple of years. And I just got really, I kind of got a little bit obsessed by it. It's kind of, it will be part of my character that if I do focus on something in particular, I can kind of see it through. And this was my focus, and I really, I just enjoyed it so much. I really enjoyed the whole songwriting part of it. Just sitting down on this particular couch even, and just sort of singing to myself. And then I felt that Nuala, my wife, was kind of always at me that you know, you need to do something about it, and she was pushing me all the time, and she's been fantastic. And I don't think without her I'd have been able to do that, really, to be quite honest. But it was just a process over a couple of years on. It was just day by day. I got more confidence. I started to do things about it, started to reach out to producers. I'm very naive to the whole process. I still don't understand it, but I mean, that wasn't the hope when I began doing this. The hope when I began doing this was that I'd probably get some sort of inner satisfaction with myself, that I've always wanted to do this, and I would get this, you know, huge sense of satisfaction from releasing an album, a whole block of work, which is what I have gotten out of it.
How does that? Sorry, go on, Adrian.
No, I was just going to say that I listened to it last night. Good morning to you, by the way, and congratulations on it. I listened to it last night, and it's a great listen. I really enjoyed it. And we'll get to Superstar in a minute, obviously. That's the whole point of this. Maybe the context of what you've just explained there is the answer to this, but it feels quite melancholic. Is that fair enough? Yeah,
very much so. Yeah, very much so. And that's probably my personality. There's a very melancholic. You know, it's very up and down, very happy, very sad. So that's exactly how I would describe it. And what I try to do is that the essential message, or the primary message, is the happy, is the positive. So there's you know, the songs that touch on very sad moments, but ultimately they accentuate the positive or the happy side of things. I would hope that was the hope of each individual song or the album itself.
Is there like a therapy almost in it then, if you're saying that's kind of part of your personality almost, and you've touched on the stuff that you've been through over the last few years? Are you finding it therapeutic, or is that just too far a stretch?
No, it's not too far a stretch. It's absolutely therapeutic. Yeah, I mean, that I did this for myself. I started to write this for me, because I felt that just even sitting down for an hour. So this is something I really struggle with. I can't stand still for 20 minutes. Just always have to be doing something. And so I felt that this was the best way for me to kind of just sit still, take a bit of time for myself, articulate what was going inside my mind. And it was a great way of, you know, coming to peace with certain things. You know, other people write books and all. I couldn't write a book. I wouldn't be able to do that. I don't think I'd be able to do it anyway. I think it would. I would be a bit worried about what would come out in a book. So I think the writing through music was a perfect way to sort of articulate how I felt, or try and express myself artistically. Like, you know, because music is subjective, so you don't have to. With true music, you don't have to get right to the point of how you're feeling. You can do it in a different way, and people can understand it in a different way. And that's the wonderful thing about it. Like, so it's I found it to be the perfect medium for me to express myself.
Yeah,
I love that. Sorry, I love that you went to see Liam Wenley, the Hallow's Flowers, like one of the greatest Irish musicians of all time, and you thought, yeah, I could do that.
I can't do it. No, well, not that he can do what he can do. It was more, I think it was just more an inspirational thing. It was like, I suppose the way of looking at it, music industry, it's not necessarily ageist. Sport can be ageist, you know, you can be done by 30, and that can be a psychological thing. I mean, that was something that, you know, even playing football, there was just this, you kind of knew when you were getting closer to 30 or early 30s that you were kind of done, and as hard as you tried, it's very difficult to kind of overcome that. Whereas I feel there are industries that aren't ageist at all, and, you know, you can actually get better with age in certain things. Music and film, acting will be kind of similar industries. So I don't know, something just triggered, and it was that moment, and I felt, you know what, I'll take a leap. I'll take a leap of faith. I'm going to step forward, and I'm going to go ahead with this, like, you know. And you kind of, things go through your head as well. You kind of feel that, you know, there's an element inside you saying, "Oh, don't do this." You know, you know, coming from the football background, there'd be plenty of people ready to have a pop at you. And I found it to be kind of the opposite. You know, there's a kind of a relationship between the two. There's a lot of similarities between performing as a footballer and performing as a musician.
How so?
Because there's a lot of rehearsal and preparation towards a gig or a performance at the end of the week. So, you know, when these guys go out on a stage and do what they do, a lot of it is talent, and because there's something that they have in them. But a lot of it is rehearsal and preparation and getting everything right, which is very similar to what you would do, like maybe as a footballer. You're kind of training every day, building up through the week to kind of perform on a Friday, on a Friday night, for example, for an hour and a half, which again would be very similar to the length of time that maybe a gig might be. That's what I use in my head. I kind of use the experience from the football to kind of relate that to the music. Now, the one thing I would say about football is that I wasn't a very expressive player when I played football. You know, I wasn't the most skillful or talented. I had different attributes. So it was, you know, it was difficult for me to kind of express myself artistically as a footballer, but I feel through music I can do that because it's just me on my own, and it's just me expressing what's going on inside my head, you know.
This is very much putting words into your mouth, but is there a situation sometimes with sport, particularly before the last 10 years or so, where there is a sort of restriction, like you mentioned there, not being an expressive player, but kind of beyond that, even in the dressing room mentality, would you have, for example, felt afraid to tell your teammates that music was something you were interested in pursuing and felt restricted that way?
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Owen. It is. My football career basically spanned a huge transition in the game. I mean, I started off at Bohemians in '94 when it was just completely part-time, and there was a completely different attitude to football back then. And then as it's kind of come through the ages and evolved, the professionalism of the game's come in. There's been huge changes, but I think your point is perfect. There would have been an element of me that would not have, not that I wouldn't have admitted it, I just wouldn't have spoken about it. Now, not to say that if I had have talked about it, I probably would have got a bit of stick for it. Yeah, to be quite honest with you, now that I think about it. But I did bring the guitar on the odd pre-season trip, believe it or not. But I kind of quickly stopped doing that. I kind of because going back to what I said previously, I'm not the kind of person who can kind of go into a group of people and say, you know, let's get living on a prayer going, or whatever the case may be. I just can't do that, like, you know. Or some people are brilliant at that, like, you know, and that's their thing, and they're, you know, they're the great people to have around. But I can't do that, so I quickly realised I can't bring the guitar with me anymore, because people are pulling out, expecting me to sing this song and that song and whatever the case may be. But
that's a really good point, Stewie. Just because you're not an extrovert doesn't mean you can't be incredibly creative.
That's really what I've gotten out of this process on. That's like, I am introverted as a personality, and I found it. I was constantly looking to try and find a way to kind of that suited me. And everyone's individual, everybody's different. Like what I could do that would help me, that could help me express myself. And this was it, you know, and I kind of always knew this was it, but the fact that I've been able to have this time over the last 2 or 3 years to go and do this was brilliant for me. It really was. It was the best thing. It's probably one of the best things I've ever done in my life, really.
Yeah, it's not unusual, Stewie, either. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, I think people tend to assume that because you can stand up on stage and perform to a crowd musically or whatever, that you have to be this extrovert. But I mean, some of the greatest musicians of all time have been exactly that type of character, who would rather just disappear into the ether afterwards. That it's not necessarily, doesn't have to be that extroverted thing. We mentioned a bit earlier on about Wes Hoolahan, and anybody who's listened to Off the Ball for any duration of time over the last number of years will know that you're a leading member of the fan club, obviously, and have had a front row seat for much of his career. Something Special, moulded from the street. It's a great song. It's third or fourth song of the album. How long have you been sitting on that one?
Oh, a couple of years, yeah. I think that was one of the earlier ones I did. I think I wrote that about 2.5 years ago. Yeah. I obviously spoke about Wes an awful lot on your show with regards to his career, and like I say, I've been very lucky to kind of play with him as a footballer and have a front row seat. Just watched him, like, you know. But I think there's something a lot deeper there as well. I think, you know, Wes kind of broke the stereotype. You know, he could very easily have gone down a different path. He's an inner city lad, and there's an awful lot going on in your life when you're a young teenager growing up in the inner city. There's people, you know, all it takes is just one bad turn, and you're in a bad way. So I think I think what's very special about him and his career is that he broke that mold, and he managed to achieve something incredible, to be quite honest with you, because he didn't do it the easy way, Adrian. Like, you know, people will probably forget that when Wes left Shelbourne, he left Shelbourne, I think it was in the May of 2005, and it all happened very, very quickly. He went to Livingston, you know, for a very, very small fee, and up in Scotland, and he had to kind of really go through his career the difficult way, you know. But he did it. I think he's done it with you know, he's very modest, Wes, like, you know, and even when you speak to him, like, he doesn't get involved in negativity, whatever. He's very much a positive character, like, you know. And I think
is the context, Stewie, to his upbringing, the key. I mean, it's a difficult one, right? Because it can in terms of his creativity that you were talking about earlier on the pitch, like that can be the context to what a like free flowing sort of force of nature almost that he was. But I could easily see it going the other way as well, because the pressure of trying to get out of that lifestyle could obviously, you know, have made him a very functional professional, which he really was not.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think there's one thing, like his mother and father were very loving. Like, I mean, I would have met his mum and dad on a few occasions, and they're lovely people. They're very grounded people, you know. And I think they were a huge factor in it. Like, you know, but Wes's character is very he's very quiet, like, you know, and he you know, when you think of it, of a young Wesley Hoolahan growing up, you know, he's quite a small guy, you know, and, you know, he had to learn how to defend himself, probably from a very early age, and he probably used football as a defense mechanism. You know, we've all sort of been there, even in school, where you know, those who play football, I suppose, seem to get this kind of free pass from others that may be subjected to bullying or whatever the case may be. So I think his defense mechanism probably was his wonderful skill and ability to play football, and people probably just looked at him and said, "Geez, you know, probably taken it back," you know. But even at that, it wasn't easy, you know, for him to kind of to get to where he got to, which was an Irish international, which was the best player in the Irish team, and to play in the Premiership. You know, he went down a route of going through the back door, really, to be quite frank, going up to Scotland, to Livingston. Then he moved on to Blackpool, where he spent 10 years in the lower leagues. But I think what he's achieved, coming from where he's come from, he's very inspirational, especially to the community that he comes from. I think that was the kind of primary message, that to the people around him, he is a wonderful example of what can be achieved if you kind of, you just put your head down and you really believe you can go somewhere.
Has he heard the song, Stewie, or does he know about it?
I don't know, actually. So this is typical me. I would never send it to him. Sure. I wouldn't do it. I know he knows about it. I would never. So I would just chat with him on text and see how he is and that kind of stuff. But I wouldn't send it to him, because I don't think he'd probably be, knowing the character that he is, he'd probably get quite embarrassed by it. So I wouldn't want to do that to him. So I know he's home. We're actually supposed to play a game, believe it or not. For Beaumont Hospital, Shelbourne are putting together a charity game in November. He'll be home for that, I think. So we might have a little chat about it then, hopefully. And
has football informed any other songs that you've written, or is there any part of the game at all that has kind of made up, even lyrically, or the way you think about putting together some of the tracks in the album?
No, I think Superstar and probably Rules of Survival will be the two, really, that I didn't really want this to be a football thing. Sure. That's kind of it's a conflict I have in my own head, believe it or not. Like it's like from the outset, I knew straight away. I mean, I obviously talk to you guys all the time. I do TV with RTE, and people. What I found quite difficult is that people have this perception of you. You play football. You're the analyst. And so they kind of can't compute that you're suddenly doing music. You know, well, that's what I found. Now, I could be completely wrong, but maybe that's a kind of a paranoia or a naivety in my own brain that I kind of need to work with. But so that transition from somebody perceiving you to be somebody else, I found has been. I wouldn't say a difficult thing. It's just sort of I kind of wanted the music to speak for itself. I didn't want football to be a huge part of it. I obviously have to play on my experiences in life, and football is a huge part of my career. And I've experienced huge ups and downs through football. I think the ups and downs come true in the album, but not necessarily in a football context.
You said that the album's given you great inner satisfaction. Has it also given you a bit of a bug that you want to go on and do more?
Yeah, well, it does. It does. I mean, the whole point of doing the album was to I was just trying to inform myself about what I would like, what I wouldn't like, what I was good at, what I was not good at. So I used that actual process to kind of just to see where it would take me. Really, it was genuinely a leap of faith in that sense. I didn't want to go into it too. I don't want to be obsessed about getting airplay, or you know, I'm not interested in popularity contests, you know, which social media will drive you down that route. I just literally wanted to kind of produce a block of content and something that I could be really proud of and see where that would take me. Now, the current environment that we find ourselves in now has just completely changed everything. So this is life, you know. Life just throws these things at you all the time. And so this is just another hurdle for us to overcome. It's another hurdle for me to overcome. So I don't know really where it'll go. You know, I would be sort of, I would have dealt with some musicians during the process. I worked with a producer called Michael Heffernan for the whole album, and he was fantastic. He was just kind of such a talented guy, such a grounded guy. North Dublin lad, which, you know, always fits the bill. But he was wonderful to work with, and he was so good at articulating how I was feeling. But, you know, when I chat to him now, even when, like, because of this whole COVID thing, the music industry has just been chucked on its knees. It really has, and I, as of yet, don't see the light at the end of the tunnel. So it's just so difficult for anybody who's involved in music and depends on it for their career. I don't know where this is going to go. I really don't know where. I don't know where the music industry is going to go. People, it had been changing all the time anyway. People consume music in such a different way, and that has been evolving year on year all the time. I find it very difficult to anticipate or to predict where people are going to be consuming music in a year.
Yeah, it's a good point. And also the whole process of parting with your own money for music has just nosedived with no live events over the last few months. So it's going to be interesting to see how quickly they get back up and running and if there's going to be any other alternatives. We also want to chat to you a little bit about football, Stuart, because there's a couple of interesting stories that we can touch on with you. Like, football is going to come back behind closed doors next week. As we know, it's going to come back in Ireland, hopefully before the end of the summer as well, behind closed doors as well. But we're also very much living in the era where we're having so many conversations about racism in the aftermath of the George Floyd killing. And these kind of two worlds converged in your career when you go back to 2009, I think it was, for a Europa League playoff, when you go to Stuart Bucharest, which was an empty stadium because there had been racial incidents at the stadium before that. Yeah,
so I think the Black Lives Matter movement is obviously it's you know, it's decades late, but it's wonderful that it's finally starting to get some traction that it deserves and that it needs. I mean, obviously, through the football culture is something that really needs to be addressed. And not just in relation to racism, it's just in relation to the general attitude of supporters at games, to be quite honest. But I did have a very, very difficult experience. Well, I mean, I'm sure Joseph and Doe and Curtis Fleming had an even more difficult experience. I played at Shells in 2005. It was actually, we played away to Steaua Bucharest, and Joseph was basically booed and Curtis were booed for the whole game. Pretty much by the crowd. They were kind of shouting monkey chants at them, and it was awful, absolutely awful, like, you know. And it's something that when it happened at the time, you don't know what to do. You're completely confused. You kind of hope that maybe the officials step in, or maybe even the sort of the hierarchy within the football club, Steaua Bucharest, maybe could have announced something, but nothing was ever done of it. And in subsequent years, like you mentioned there, we went to play even for Pats. We played Bucharest again in 2009, and we ended up playing the game in an empty stadium over in Bucharest. So it was a 30,000 seater stadium, which was completely empty because they'd been banned for the exact same thing that happened probably 5 years previous, you know. So I think and this is just a one example in a football context that it hasn't been addressed at all, you know, and hopefully it will be addressed now. But I think on top of addressing racism in football, I think we also need to have just look at general abuse in football, because it's just some of the things you hear coming out of the mouths of supporters at games is vile, you know, and it just shouldn't be tolerated. It shouldn't be tolerated. It's very difficult for families who sit in a stadium and they, you know, a guy 3 seats down is roaring vile abuse at the football player. It's very difficult for them to do anything about it. So I think it's something that collectively the football family needs to address, and hopefully that's something that they do.
Yeah, like what do you do, Stewie, is the question, isn't it? Because like if we were chatting about it in last week's show, like bans obviously is the go-to thing for sport. We're going to give those fans a lifetime ban, but it doesn't really address the problem.
Yeah. I think the educational side of it is huge, Adrian. I think these guys just genuinely have been. These people have been reared in such an awful way. The way they think is just beyond comprehension for me or for anyone that really understands anything about culture or whatever the case may be. So I think there definitely has to be a punishment element of it. Whether the punishment element of it involves an education, trying to educate these people, I think it is that could be important. But it's definitely one of the biggest tasks that we have. If you're talking about from a football point of view, it's a huge task for the football family to address. It really is. But I think it plays. There's a lot more at stake here. We're trying to attract more people to come to watch football games here. Like, we want to get more children coming to games, more families coming to games, and people will go on about the people go on about the facilities, whatever. But I think the general atmosphere that people will come across at games is a difficulty. Some of the games can be fantastic for atmosphere. I mean, you know, guys singing at full voice. But there are times, you know, and there's no point in hiding behind it, when you can go to a game and you can just hear somebody shouting absolute vile abuse at a young 18, 19-year-old kid or whatever the case may be, and that can't be tolerated, and it shouldn't be tolerated by the supporters.
What was the game, Stewie? Sorry, that you mentioned. That was it a specific game where Joseph and Curtis had been subject to that abuse?
Yeah, so it was the Bucharest away game. Yeah. It was the it happened in 2005, and they subsequently got, I think they got a fine for it. I think it was 20,000 euro or something at the time. It was just piecemeal.
What stage of the game did it happen? Was it all the way through it, or?
So I remember it coming. I think it escalated when Joseph came off the bench. So I remember it being a second half thing. Although Curtis had said that he was getting abused in the first half. But it's funny because it just happened to be the way it turned out. Curtis was playing right full, so obviously in the first half he was the furthest part away from the bad element within the crowd, and then obviously in the second half he was on that side, and it escalated in the second half, like, you know. But
and you're chatting about it then, Stewie. Are you talking about it at half time? Are you talking about it on the pitch?
So, do you know what, Adrian? I was actually trying to think about it now. Funnily enough, I wasn't part of the conversation. I don't know what happened in the dressing room after the game, because I was taken away for a drug test. Myself and Jason Byrne were pulled off the pitch when we were walking off, and we were gone for an hour and a half. So I to this day I don't know what. I know we had conversations about it on the bus and in the hotel afterwards, but. I believe the guys were extremely upset in the dressing room after the game, like, you know. But they obviously had their teammates to kind of try and to talk to about. But it doesn't matter. I mean, these would have been experiences that they probably have been experienced their whole lives, and I can't understand that, because I haven't lived that life, so I can't pretend to know that I understand it. But I try to understand it as best I can, like, you know, but it was very, very, very difficult for them.
One last one for me on that one, and we must actually have them on and have a chat with them about it. Was it they were upset obviously afterwards, and it's not something that any player or anybody in any walk of life should have to go through, but it does suggest that maybe, and I definitely don't want to be putting words in your mouth, because we had our own Taoiseach stand up obviously in the Dáil a couple of weeks back and say that we need to take a strong hard look at ourselves before we start pointing fingers at others. But was it something then that was at odds with their experiences in Ireland, or was it something that you were aware of that would have happened around the League of Ireland?
I think there's no point in us kind of pretending that we're not a racist, because it does happen in the League of Ireland. It happens here. There's no doubt it happens here, and it's something that we have to, it's something that we have to address as people. Like, we have this fantastic sort of. We're well known throughout the world for being, very welcoming people, hardworking, full of the crack, whatever the case may be. But there's no doubt about it when it comes to racism. It is an issue here. It's a big issue here. And I think I'm even learning myself now throughout what's going on now about how I should conduct myself better when it comes to these things. So I think one of the messages that's coming out is that people don't need to just be against racism. They need to be anti-racism. So we need to kind of proactively stand up and say it's wrong. Somebody who's out of line, who thinks that they aren't being offensive when they're talking about something, that we have to kind of change that. And it's a people thing. Only people can change this. It's not something that's gone. I don't think forcing it on people is going to make much of a difference. I think people need to kind of educate themselves, and it's a conversation, I suppose, that has to happen. Look, I've a lot of faith that we can do this, because we've done such, we've changed so much about our own culture in the recent years, especially when it comes to the LGBT movement and gay marriage and things like that, like abortion. We've sort of taken on these kind of conversations head on, and this is another one that we're going to have to take on.
For sure. Stewie, it's been great chatting with you this morning. Thanks a million for being so generous with your time. Congratulations once again on the album. It is maybe not today. It is out right now. Stuart Byrne, thanks a million.